Hello and welcome to Present Day Production. We'd like to start off by thanking all the new subscribers that have joined us in the last few weeks and for all those that have taken the time to comment on the videos. We really appreciate it and it's really encouraging for us to see such great feedback. So this video is in response to a comment from, sorry if I pronounced this wrong, Uni Helminen, who says, how do you feel about the Klark Teknik EQ and compressors versus the software? Is there enough of a difference with the real thing? If you were only buying one hardware EQ or compressor and doing the rest in software, what would it be? Well, let's have a look at the specific hardware in question. Uni has obviously seen our 1176 and Pultec shootouts, and the links to those are in the description and at the end of the video if you haven't seen them already. And we were incredibly impressed with both. Nothing quite captures the mojo of the Silverface 1176 at more extreme settings, but you have to take into account the difference in price. An original Silverface 76 would cost you thousands, and the same with the vintage Pultec EQ. But the Klark Tekniks come in at just £199. That's an insanely low price for such a high quality product. If you take a look inside the units, as expected, they're constructed very differently. All the Pultec EQs were made by hand and feature passive inductors in the tone shaping sections of the circuit. The KT unit is obviously mass produced and uses surface mount components, and the circuitry is very different. However, both the 76KT and the EQP-KT get remarkably close to the real thing at sensible normal mix levels. We did a blind test with the EQP-KT in our mastering room. Mark sat there and listened while I switched between them, and he couldn't tell reliably or repeatedly the difference between the two. So we think the Klark Teknik units are a great buy if you want some hardware in your system. But you do have to ask the question, do you want hardware in your system or do you need hardware in your system, and why? Firstly, let's look at the pros of hardware. It's fun. This is the biggest one. It looks cool, it gives you tactile knobs and buttons to play with, and it can make you feel special. If you have a studio at home and it consists of a laptop and a pair of headphones, it doesn't really say studio when you walk in the room. Having a couple of racks of hardware can make your room more studio-like in the traditional sense, and that can affect your creativity in a positive way. Let's take, for example, when I'm editing one of these videos for YouTube. It's all done on a computer, entirely in the box, but quite often I'll have a camera set up in the room. It's not actually doing anything. We've already done the camera stuff in the filming process. It's just looking nice. It looks cool. And when I pop out to make a rubbish cup of tea or have a cheeky wee, it catches my eye, reminds me of the headspace I'm in and makes me feel more productive. The same can go with the computer itself. It's got a glass panel on it so I can see all the components. It's got lights on it, I have 3 screens. It makes me feel more productive because my kit looks cool. It's giving me a productive vibe when I look at it, and that's what matters for me. Then, of course, there's the sound. As our shootouts have shown, software has come a long way in the last decade. And if you take the mix we did of the 1176s in action, compared with the software versions at sensible settings, I defy anyone to repeatably tell me which was which. However, at the more extreme settings, the software fell to pieces really quickly. It just doesn't distort in the pleasing way that hardware does, particularly in the case of the Silverface. It's close. A Kemper can sound just as good as any valve amp in full flight, but it does sound different. Having said that, some of the best guitar tones we've ever achieved in this studio were through a Kemper. It's about how you use the tools you have. An awful guitarist with the best guitar through the most sweet sounding amp is still going to be an awful guitarist. So over to Mark for his take on the hardware versus software debate.
I'm old. I'm of a completely different generation to James. I've been around the block, started off with 1/2-inch tape when the only option was hardware, learned how to use it, progressed up to 2-inch tape through the early digital systems, had a brief foray with ADAT, which for those of you regular viewers will know I hate with a passion, and then embraced the digital revolution once it moved on to more stable computer systems with great sounding interfaces and great sounding plugins. What often limited me with the hardware was the amount of it that was required. I quickly discovered that with software I could have the same instance of a compressor on as many channels as the system would allow, and this gave me personally far better results than relying on hardware. But for me, when you're recording, it's all about what goes in. When I'm not working, I play in a Hammond-led funk band, and I have to have this. I can't use a Nord, I can't use one of the new digital Hammond clones, and I certainly can't use a software emulation. It doesn't give me the tactile feel of this, and that is what I need in order to sound like I'm performing on one of these. I mean, moving drawbars with a mouse, no, that's not going to happen. I need to do this. So this is the greatest bit of hardware that I own. I've owned it since I was 17 years old, and it forms an integral part of my musical identity. However, once I've captured this sound, I no longer care. If I'm given hardware, I can get a mix sounding how I want pretty quickly. If I'm forced to work entirely in the box, I can get it sounding how I want pretty quickly. This still sounds like this, and that's the critical thing for me. As far as recording and mixing hardware goes, compressors, EQs, etc., you have to be very careful if using hardware that you don't overcook things, especially if using it on the way in. If you've just spent £8,000 on a Shadow Hills compressor, you're going to be pretty tempted to use that on everything, and whilst it's an incredible compressor, it's not the right tool for every job, and if you've overcompressed that perfect take on the way in, it can be impossible to undo later. For me personally, my job is mastering, and I've used all sorts of hardware and all sorts of software over the years, and if I had to make one major change to my setup, it would be, and this is something I'm actually planning for later in the year, to get rid of this. The biggest improvement I could make to the quality of my work today would be to make sure that there is absolutely nothing in between me and the speakers. I'm confident that I can achieve just as good a result pretty much entirely in the box as I can with any hardware, so I think the way forward for me will be to come up with some kind of iPad control solution, and just me in a room on a chair with an iPad controlling a remote computer with a pair of speakers, and that's it. I think I'd be perfectly happy with that and would probably get better results because I can hear what's coming directly out the speakers. That sound isn't coloured at all by having a bloody great big desk in the way. So for someone like me, if you ask me what hardware you should buy, my advice would be to spend as much as you possibly can on the room and your monitors, because that will make the biggest difference to the quality of your work, and that nothing else really matters. The rest is just personal preference.
For me personally, I have had the experience just like Mark with both analog and digital. In our previous studio, we had a huge 48-channel Soundtracks mixing desk. The preamps sounded great, so it worked just fine for us as a tool for tracking. However, in the mixing stage, it was used as a keyboard stand. Why? Although the EQs sounded great and the compressors sounded great, you'd more often find that they sounded slightly different on each channel, which makes it more difficult to match sounds when I'm trying to get a mix together, especially with stereo pairs. I don't want the hassle of having to match hardware just to get an even starting point. For me, that's the reason why I use software on any production I do. For tracking, yes, sometimes it's good to use it for fun and to make the vocals sound a little bit nicer on the way in, for example, and sometimes it may up the performance quality if the singer can hear themselves in a better way in the headphones. For me, it's the way I've learned to work, and it's just easier and more intuitive in the studio for me to use everything in one place on the computer. I believe that everyone works in their own way, so this video definitely isn't saying that you're wrong for using hardware or software or a mixture of the two. It all boils down to what you learn, the kit you have, what you can afford, what you prefer using, and most importantly, what sounds better to your ears.
And I agree with James. It's about workflow. It's about what works for you and what helps you achieve the finished result. To quote Andrew Sheps, the only thing that matters is what comes out of the speakers, and it doesn't matter how you get there. The audience don't care. If you've watched my interview with Sean Lee or know him yourself, you'll know that his studio is crammed with hardware. But all that hardware is about giving Sean the right vibe for what he's working on. It's about creativity, about having fun and enjoying the creative process, being instantly able to grab the right right tool for the job. At the end of the day, and to go back to Uni's question, there is no silver bullet. There is no one single piece of hardware or software that will give you that magic sound that you might have in your head. That sound comes from learning and experience. But I'm with James. Hardware's biggest pro in 2020 is fun. I'll never forget the fun we had putting the 1176 and Pultec shootout videos together, having all that gear from FX Rentals turning up and spending a few days getting to know it, its quirks and intricacies, and there can be no doubt that hardware can introduce character. My Slate FG116 plugin sounds exactly the same as your Slate FG116 plugin, whereas even different units of the same revision of hardware sounded radically different. But is that what makes the track unique? No. It's Chris's drums and the way he grooves. It's Andrew's bass. It's Michael's Rhodes and the way he is at one with the instrument, and that instrument is unique to him. It's Andy's vocal. That's what gives that track its sound, and that's where the choices you make have more impact. What compressor you use on the bass doesn't have anywhere near as much impact on the finished result as who you choose to play the bass. So to answer your question, if I was only buying one hardware compressor or EQ, what would it be? My answer would be no compressor or EQ. I'd spend the money on better monitoring and acoustics, and if I had a session where I thought hardware would be fun and help in making a memory and enhance the creative process, I'd hire a load of classic gear in from FX Rentals. So thanks to Uni for the question. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't, give us a thumbs down. If you really hated it, give us a thumbs down twice. That'll be even better. Please hit that subscribe button, smash the bell, do all those lovely tingling things, and we'll see you in the next video.